The champagne had gone warm in her hand by the time she understood he wasn't coming. Elena stood at the center of the Waldorf ballroom in a dress that cost more than her childhood home, surrounded by 200 people who had stopped pretending to check their phones. The orchestra had run out of filler music 20 minutes ago. Her future mother-in-law's smile had calcified into something that looked like pity wrapped in contempt. And Marcus, her fiancé, her salvation, her ticket out of a life spent apologizing for where she came from, had sent a text message that his assistant was now reading aloud to the wedding planner in a voice that carried. "I can't do this. Tell her I'm sorry." 6 words. No call, no explanation, just absence where a promise should have been. She felt the room inhale as one organism, felt the weight of their collective judgment pressing against her ribs like a corset pulled too tight. Someone's grandmother whispered something in French that Elena didn't need to translate. A camera phone flashed near the ice sculpture. And then, from the back corner where the serious money had been watching in silence, a chair scraped against marble. A man stood up. 3 weeks earlier, Elena had believed in fairy tales. Not the kind with glass slippers. She'd learned young that those shattered under real weight. But the practical kind. The ones where a girl who'd spent her childhood in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through Columbia, who'd learned which fork to use by watching YouTube videos, could marry into the kind of family that had used the right forks since before America was a country. Marcus Whitmore III had proposed in the conservatory garden in Central Park, on one knee in front of the Vanderbilt gate, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. A Harry Winston emerald cut that caught light like captured stars. She'd said yes because she loved him, yes, but also because she was tired of proving herself, tired of being the scholarship student, the charity case, the girl who didn't quite belong in the rooms her MBA had granted her access to. His mother had smiled with her mouth but not her eyes when they'd announced it at the family dinner. His father had asked about her people as if she were anthropological study. His sister Vanessa had looked at her engagement ring and said, "How sentimental," in a tone that made sentiment sound like a disease. But Marcus had held her hand under the table, had whispered, "They'll come around," against her temple later that night, had promised that love was enough. She'd wanted to believe him. The Waldorf had been his mother's choice. The only appropriate venue, Patricia Whitmore had declared, as if the Plaza or the St. Regis were somehow demonstrably inferior. The guest list had swelled from 50 to 200. The budget had tripled. Elena's mother, who'd flown in from Tampa, where she'd retired after 30 years as a nurse, had taken one look at the seating chart and said quietly, "Mija, are you sure about this?" Elena had been sure, or she'd been committed, which was almost the same thing. Now, standing in the bridal suite 3 hours before the party, watching the stylist arrange her hair into something that looked expensive, she caught her own reflection and barely recognized herself. The dress was Valentino, the shoes Manolo Blahnik. Her makeup had taken 90 minutes to apply. She looked like she belonged in a magazine spread titled Modern Elegance or Old Money Meets New. She looked like someone else's dream of who she should be. "You're going to be stunning," the stylist said, mistaking her silence for nerves. Elena's phone buzzed. "Marcus. Running late. Meeting went long. There in an hour. Love you." She smiled at the screen, typed back a heart emoji, ignored the small knot forming below her sternum. "Everything okay?" her mother asked from the corner, where she sat in a dress they'd found at Nordstrom Rack, altered to fit perfectly but still somehow marked as different from what the other mothers would wear. "Everything's perfect," Elena lied. The ballroom had been transformed into something from a Russian winter palace. White roses climbed crystal pillars. Ice sculptures shaped like swans guarded the champagne fountains. Tables dressed in silk held place cards written in calligraphy that cost $15 per letter. The ceiling had been draped in fabric that caught the chandelier light and scattered it like snow. Patricia Whitmore surveyed it all with the satisfaction of a general viewing a battlefield prepared to her specifications. "It's exactly right," she declared to the wedding planner, who looked relieved enough to cry. Then, turning to Elena with that smile that never reached her eyes, "You must be so excited, dear." "I am," Elena said, because that was the script. "Marcus should be here within the hour," Patricia continued, checking her watch, a vintage Cartier that probably cost more than Elena's college tuition. "Traffic from the financial district is always unpredictable on Fridays." But it was Saturday. Elena felt that knot pulled tighter. Guests began to arrive at 6. The who's who of Manhattan's financial elite, old money mixed with new, everyone dressed in variations of expensive neutrals that somehow cost more than bright colors ever could. Elena recognized faces from the society pages, from Forbes covers, from the background of news segments about economic policy. She stood in the receiving line next to Patricia, shaking hands and accepting air kisses from people whose names she'd memorized from Marcus's coaching sessions. Remember, Evelyn Hartford's husband owns the third largest hedge fund in North America. Stuart Chen just closed a deal with Singapore that made the Wall Street Journal. The Vanderbilts, yes, those Vanderbilts, always arrive fashionably late. She remembered. She smiled. She said all the right things. And Marcus didn't arrive. By 7:30 the knot had become a fist. By 7 the fist had claws. She texted him twice, called once, both went to voicemail. Patricia's smile developed hairline fractures. "It's just that he's caught up, you know how he gets when he's working." But Elena had been dating Marcus for 2 years. She knew his patterns, knew he always called back within 10 minutes, knew he set alarms for important events, knew that he had his tuxedo delivered to his office 3 days ago specifically so he could dress there and arrive on time. By 7:15 the murmurs started. By 7:30 people had stopped pretending to not notice. The orchestra played Vivaldi, then Pachelbel, then cycled back through their entire repertoire of elegant filler music. The ice sculptures began to weep in the warmth of 200 bodies pretending everything was fine. A waiter dropped a tray of champagne flutes near the entrance, and the crash made Elena flinch so hard she felt it in her teeth. "Perhaps we should make an announcement," Patricia suggested, her voice tight as wire. "Explain that Marcus has been delayed, invite everyone to begin cocktails." "He'll be here," Elena said, hating how her voice sounded. Small, desperate, like the girl from Queens who'd never really belonged in this ballroom at all. That's when she noticed him. In the back corner, at a table that hadn't been part of the original seating chart, sat a man who clearly didn't come for the champagne or the spectacle. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than Elena's Valentino dress, cut with the kind of precision that suggested Savile Row, or perhaps even more exclusive. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples. His eyes were the kind that didn't need to be handsome to be magnetic. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes that looked like they calculated risk portfolios in their sleep. He wasn't checking his phone, wasn't making small talk with the people around him. He was watching her. Elena stared at him. Her brain, which had been operating on some kind of shock-induced autopilot, stuttered and stalled. She knew that voice. Not personally, but the way you know a voice that's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, analyzed on CNBC, dissected in business school case studies. Damien Cross. The Damien Cross, the man who'd turned a failing tech startup into a billion-dollar empire before he was 30, who'd quietly acquired half of Manhattan's commercial real estate while everyone else was busy with flashier investments, who didn't do interviews, didn't attend society functions, and absolutely did not intervene in public humiliations at engagement parties. Except apparently he did. "I'm sorry?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she wanted. She hated that. Hated that even now, even standing in the wreckage of her entire life, she couldn't quite manage the kind of confidence that came naturally to people who'd never had to earn their space in a room. "You heard me." He didn't smile, didn't soften it with anything approaching sympathy, just stated it like a fact. "This," he gestured vaguely at the ballroom, at Patricia, at the 200 people still frozen in various states of shock, "is beneath you." Patricia found her voice. "Mr. Cross, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Whitmore." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Elena. "Your son is a coward who broke his engagement via his mother and a text message. Your family has spent the last hour allowing this woman to stand here and absorb public humiliation for his failures. And you—" Now he did look at Patricia, and Elena watched her future former mother-in-law actually take a step back. "Were about to let her make a speech thanking people for witnessing it." The silence was so complete Elena could hear her own heartbeat. "This is a private family matter," Patricia said, but her voice had lost its edge. "No." Damien's voice stayed quiet, stayed level. Somehow that made it more devastating. "This stopped being private the moment your son made it a spectacle. Miss Reyes, do you have your belongings?" Elena's mind was moving too slowly. "My what?" "Your phone, your bag, whatever you brought with you tonight." Yes, in the bridal suite." "Get them." Not a request, a command delivered with the absolute certainty that it would be obeyed. "You have 2 minutes." "Now wait just a minute," Patricia started. Damien turned to her fully, said nothing, just looked at her with those steel-gray eyes until she stopped talking. Elena should have objected, should have said something about not taking orders from strange men, about handling her own disasters, about not needing rescue from a billionaire who'd probably never been publicly humiliated in his life. Instead, she found her legs moving, found herself walking toward the bridal suite on autopilot, her mother appearing at her elbow like a guardian angel. "Mija," her mother whispered urgently as they climbed the stairs, "who is that man?" "Damien Cross. He's nobody. I mean, he's somebody, but I don't know him. I've never even met him before tonight." "He looked at you like he knows you." "He doesn't," Elena said, pushing open the door to the bridal suite. Her overnight bag sat exactly where she'd left it, packed with a change of clothes for tomorrow, for the day she was supposed to wake up as Marcus Whitmore's fiancé, with an engagement party behind her and a wedding date set. Her hand shook as she grabbed it. "Elena," her mother caught her shoulders, turned her around. "Are you okay?" It was the first time anyone had asked, the first time anyone had looked at her like a person instead of a plot point in someone else's drama. Elena felt her face crumple, felt the tears she'd been holding back for the last hour rise up in her throat like a wave. "Mama!" "I know, baby, I know." Her mother pulled her close, and Elena let herself break for exactly 10 seconds. Sobbed into her mother's shoulder while her carefully applied makeup ran and her styled hair came loose from its pins. 10 seconds. Then she pulled back, wiped her eyes, and found that place inside herself that had survived worse than this, that had survived poverty and prejudice and every person who'd ever told her she didn't belong. "I'm okay," she said. Meant it, or would mean it, eventually. "That man downstairs is probably just trying to embarrass Patricia Whitmore. The Crosses and the Whitmores have been competitors for years." Elena didn't know if that was true. She was improvising, trying to make sense at something that didn't make sense. But her mother gave her a look, the look, the one that said she knew her daughter was lying but would let it slide for now. They walked back down together. Elena had expected the scene to have devolved somehow, expected Patricia to have reasserted control, expected Damien Cross to have disappeared like a fever dream, expected the guests to have scattered into gossip clusters. Instead, the tableau had frozen. Damien stood exactly where she'd left him, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. Patricia stood across from him, silent and pale. The guests remained at their tables, and Elena realized with a sick jolt that none of them had left. They were waiting to see what happened next. She was still the entertainment. Damien's eyes found her as soon as she appeared, tracked her descent down the stairs, her mother beside her, her overnight bag clutched in one hand. Ready? For what? To leave. I can call a car. I have a car, he said. That settled the matter. Then, before she could argue, he turned to address the room, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. For those of you wondering, and I know you are, Miss Reyes will be fine, better than fine. The Whitmore boys' loss is the market's gain. I'm sure we'll all see her again soon. What did that mean? Elena's brain couldn't parse it, but the room could. I saw it register on their faces, saw the calculations happening behind expensive facelifts and Botoxed foreheads. Damien Cross didn't make statements like that casually, didn't attach himself to people publicly without reason. He just, what? Claimed her? Vouched for her? Shifted the entire narrative from poor girl left at the altar to smart woman noticed by the most dangerous man in the room? Mr. Cross, Patricia tried one last time. This really isn't. Good night, Mrs. Whitmore. He didn't wait for a response, just turned to Elena, gestured toward the exit. Shall we? Elena looked at her mother, who nodded, looked at the room full of people who'd watched her humiliation with varying degrees of satisfaction, looked at Patricia, whose face had arranged itself into something that might have been fear. And then she walked. Damien fell into step beside her, didn't touch her, didn't rush her, just matched her pace as they crossed the ballroom, past the melting ice sculptures and the cooling champagne and the white roses that cost a fortune to look effortless. The whispers started again as soon as they reached the door, but these ones sounded different, uncertain, afraid they'd miscalculated something important. A black car waited at the curb, not a town car, not even a standard luxury vehicle, a Rolls-Royce Phantom that probably cost more than most people's houses. A driver appeared, tall, professional, unreadable, and opened the door. Damien gestured for Elena and her mother to enter first. "Where are we going?" Elena asked finally, finding her voice. "Away from here. Unless you'd prefer to stay and field questions from the society pages tomorrow morning." Elena thought about Marcus, about Charlotte Ashford, about 200 people with camera phones and Instagram accounts. She got in the car. Her mother slid beside her. Damien took the seat across from them, giving them space. The door closed with the kind of sound that suggested bulletproof glass and privacy. The Waldorf disappeared behind them. And Elena realized with a clarity that felt like breaking the surface after nearly drowning, that she had no idea what happened next. The car slid through Manhattan like a shark through dark water, silent, powerful, completely indifferent to the chaos of Friday night traffic that parted before it. Elena sat perfectly still, her mother's hand tight around hers, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The interior of the Rolls-Royce smelled like leather and something else, maybe sandalwood, maybe just the scent of money so old it had stopped trying to prove anything. Damien Cross hadn't spoken since they'd gotten in. He sat across from them, one ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling through his phone with the kind of focus that suggested he'd already moved on from tonight's drama to whatever crisis required his attention next. Except he'd the one who'd created tonight's drama, or redirected it, or Elena's mind was still struggling to categorize what exactly had happened back there. "Thank you," she said finally, because someone had to break the silence, and her mother was currently radiating the kind of protective energy that suggested she was seconds away from demanding identification and references. "Mr. Cross, Mrs. Reyes." He set down his phone, gave her his full attention. Elena watched her mother assess him with the same clinical precision she'd once used to triage emergency room patients, looking for lies, for danger, for the kind of predatory interest that sometimes disguised itself as rescue. "Why did you do that?" her mother asked. "You don't know my daughter." "No, I don't." "So why intervene?" "Because no one else was going to." He said it matter-of-factly, without heroism or false modesty. "And because I dislike waste." Elena blinked. "Waste? You?" He looked at her now, and she felt the full weight of that gray-eyed attention. It was like being analyzed by an algorithm designed to find value in things other people overlooked. You, Columbia MBA, top 5% of your class, 3 years at Goldman before you moved to Whitmore Capital, Marcus's family firm, convenient. You restructured their emerging markets portfolio and increased returns by 18% in your first year. The industry noticed. His family didn't. Elena's mouth went dry. "How do you—" "I pay attention to talent." He leaned forward slightly. "Especially when it's being systematically undervalued. You've spent 2 years making Marcus Whitmore look competent while his mother made sure you never got credit for the work. Tonight was inevitable. The only question was whether you'd survive it intact. And you decided to— what? Ensure I did? I decided to make it clear that your value isn't contingent on the Whitmore name." He sat back. "Consider it a market correction." Her mother made a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. "You talk about my daughter like she's a stock portfolio." "I talk about everyone like they're a portfolio, Mrs. Reyes. The difference is whether I think they're worth the investment." The car turned onto a quieter street. Elena recognized the neighborhood, Upper East Side, the really expensive part, where the buildings had names instead of numbers. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My hotel. The penthouse has a guest suite. You and your mother can stay there tonight." "We have a hotel." "The Whitmore family booked your hotel," Damien said. "I'm guessing they've already canceled the reservation, along with the credit card Marcus gave you, the membership to his club, and probably the LinkedIn recommendations his sister wrote. They're efficient at excising problems." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't realized how many parts of her life in the last 2 years had been Whitmore adjacent, Whitmore dependent. The job at Whitmore Capital, the apartment she could only afford because Marcus had co-signed the lease, the social connections that opened doors she'd spent her whole life trying to access. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Breathe," her mother said sharply. "Mija, breathe." Elena tried. Her lungs didn't cooperate. The Valentino dress suddenly felt like it was crushing her rib cage. I need to—" "Stop the car," Damien said. The Rolls-Royce glided to the curb. The driver appeared, opened the door. Cool November air rushed in, cutting through the panic that had been building behind Elena's sternum. She stumbled out onto the sidewalk, bent over, hands on her knees, and tried to remember that she'd survived worse than this, that she'd built herself from nothing once and could do it again, that Marcus Whitmore wasn't the foundation, he was just the scaffolding she'd mistaken for structure. Footsteps behind her, her mother's hand on her back, rubbing slow circles the way she had when Elena was small and afraid of thunderstorms. And then Damien's voice, quiet and close. "You're thinking about everything you've lost." Elena straightened, wiped her eyes. "Wouldn't you?" "No." He stood a careful distance away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable in the streetlight. "I'd be thinking about what I'm about to gain. I just lost my fiancé, my job, and my entire social circle in one night. What exactly am I gaining?" "Freedom from people who are always going to hold you back." He tilted his head slightly. "You're angry. Good, use it. Marcus Whitmore just gave you the greatest gift of your life. He let you see exactly who he was before you married him, before you wasted decades trying to be enough for people who were always going to find you lacking." The words hit like a slap, like truth. "You don't know me," Elena said, but it came out weak. "I know your work. I know you're smart enough to have seen this coming and chose to ignore it because you were tired of fighting. I know you're standing here in a $15,000 dress, panicking about hotel reservations, instead of recognizing that you just got handed a severance package from the worst investment of your life. He wasn't an investment. Yes, he was. Damien's voice stayed level, stayed honest in a way that felt almost cruel. You invested 2 years of your life, your professional reputation, and your sense of self-worth into a man who was never going to choose you over his family's approval. That's not love, Miss Reyes. That's strategy. Bad strategy. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she'd loved Marcus, that it had been real, that the last 2 years hadn't been some calculated social climb. But standing here on a street corner in a borrowed dress, with her mother beside her and a strange billionaire telling her uncomfortable truths, she couldn't quite remember what loving Marcus had felt like. She remembered feeling grateful, validated, relieved. She didn't remember feeling seen. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. Damien smiled. It was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him all night, and it transformed his face from severe to something almost human. "Right now, I want you to get back in the car before you freeze to death in Couture. Tomorrow we'll discuss what comes next." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I have a position opening at Cross Ventures that requires someone with your exact skill set and none of the Whitmore family baggage. Because Patricia Whitmore has been attempting a hostile takeover of one of my subsidiary companies, and I enjoy making her uncomfortable. And because—" he paused, considered, then finished. "I told you I dislike waste." Her mother stepped forward. "What kind of position?" "Director of Strategic Acquisitions, 60% salary increase from what she was making at Whitmore Capital, full benefits, and a clause in the contract that prevents any member of the Whitmore family from contacting her for business or personal reasons for the next 5 years." Elena stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about business, Miss Reyes. The question is whether you are." He gestured toward the car. "The offer expires at midnight. That gives you approximately—" he checked his watch, "90 minutes to decide if you want to spend the next year rebuilding your life on your own terms or the next decade wondering what would have happened if you'd said yes." It wasn't a rescue, Elena realized now. It was a transaction, a calculated move in whatever game Damien Cross was playing with the Whitmore family. But it was also a door, and she'd spent her entire life walking through doors that only opened once. Elena looked at her mother, who was watching her with an expression Elena knew well. Pride mixed with worry, mixed with absolute faith that her daughter would make the right choice. Elena looked at Damien Cross, who was offering her exactly what she'd thought Marcus would give her, a place in a world that had always kept her on the outside. The difference was that Damien was offering it as an equal, as someone who'd earned it. Not as a consolation prize for being left at the altar, but as recognition for everything she'd already proven she could do. Elena took a breath, felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. "I want the contract in writing, and I want to review it with my own lawyer before I sign anything." Damien's smile widened. "Excellent. You'll have it by morning. Now, can we please get out of the cold before your mother decides I'm trying to give you pneumonia along with a job offer?" The penthouse suite at the Carlyle was the kind of space that made Elena's old apartment look like a storage closet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the city lights turning the darkness into something that looked almost magical. The guest room had a king-sized bed with linens that probably had a thread count higher than her credit score. The bathroom had heated marble floors and a shower with 6 different settings. Her mother had taken one look around and said, "Mija, this man is either very generous or very dangerous." "Maybe both," Elena had replied. Now, 3 hours later, her mother was asleep in the guest room, and Elena stood at the window in borrowed pajamas, silk, because apparently Damien Cross kept a full wardrobe of unopened designer clothes in various sizes for unexpected guests, watching the city that had just chewed her up and spit her out. Her phone had been vibrating steadily since they'd left the Waldorf. Texts from people she'd thought were friends, all variations on the same theme. "OMG, are you okay? What happened? Is it true about Charlotte?" Each one carefully worded to sound concerned while really asking for details they could share at brunch tomorrow. She'd turned it off an hour ago. A knock at the door made her turn. "It's open," she called. Damien entered carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of scotch that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. He'd changed out of his suit into dark slacks and a charcoal cashmere sweater that made him look less like a corporate predator and more like a very dangerous literature professor. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." "I don't sleep much." He set the glasses on the coffee table, poured 2 fingers into each, handed her one. "Your contract." Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures' letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured. Another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him, "This is more than you offered in the car." "I revised it after watching you negotiate." He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. "Your contract." Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures' letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured. Another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him, "This is more than you offered in the car." "I revised it after watching you negotiate." He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. "Your contract." Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures' letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured. Another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him, "This is more than you offered in the car." "I revised it after watching you negotiate." He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. "Your contract." Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures' letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured. Another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him, "This is more than you offered in the car." "I revised it after watching you negotiate." He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. "Your contract." Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures' letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured. Another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him, "This is more than you offered in the car." "I revised it after watching you negotiate." He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. "Your contract." Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures' letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. a signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured, another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him. This is more than you offered in the car. I revised it after watching you negotiate. He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. Your contract. Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured, another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him. This is more than you offered in the car. I revised it after watching you negotiate. He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. Your contract. Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured, another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him. This is more than you offered in the car. I revised it after watching you negotiate. He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. Your contract. Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured, another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him. This is more than you offered in the car. I revised it after watching you negotiate. He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. Your contract. Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured, another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him. This is more than you offered in the car. I revised it after watching you negotiate. He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. Your contract. Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured, another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him. This is more than you offered in the car. I revised it after watching you negotiate. He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. Your contract. Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. The salary, the benefits, the Whitmore exclusion clause. But there was more. A signing bonus, stock options, a clause that guaranteed her credit for any deals she structured, another clause that prevented anyone in the company from undermining her authority or questioning her credentials. She looked up at him. This is more than you offered in the car. I revised it after watching you negotiate. He settled into the armchair across from her, scotch in hand. Your contract. Elena took it. The document was on Cross Ventures letterhead, professionally printed, already signed by Damien at the bottom. She scanned the terms. Everything he'd promised was there. She picked up the pen, signed her name at the bottom of the contract in clear, decisive letters. "When do I start?" "Monday, 9 a.m. I'll have an office ready for you." He stood, collected the contract. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be complicated." "Why tomorrow?" "Because the story's already on page 6's website. Whitmore heir abandons fiancé, mystery billionaire intervenes. They got a photo of us leaving together. It's not flattering, but it's effective." Elena's stomach dropped. "That's going to make everything worse." "No, it's going to make everything different." Damien moved toward the door, then paused. "Marcus spent 2 years teaching you to be smaller so he could feel bigger. I'm giving you permission to take up space again. Tomorrow, everyone's going to have an opinion about what happened tonight and what it means. Let them talk. You have work to do." He left before she could respond. Elena walked back to the window, pulled out her phone, and against her better judgment, turned it back on. 63 messages, 27 missed calls, and at the top of her news feed, exactly as Damien had said, a photo of her leaving the Waldorf, overnight bag in hand, Damien Cross beside her, looking like he owned the entire island of Manhattan. The headline read, "From abandoned bride to corporate queen, Elena Reyes and Damien Cross leave engagement party together." Below it, the speculation had already started. Was this revenge? A rebound? A business arrangement? Had they known each other before tonight? And in the comments, because there were always comments, a mix of sympathy and suspicion, and the kind of vicious glee that the internet reserved for watching powerful people's private disasters play out in public. But there, buried in the thread, one comment stood out. She restructured Whitmore Capital's emerging markets portfolio and increased returns by 18% in 1 year. Maybe she was always too smart for that family. Maybe Cross just recognized what they couldn't see. Elena read it 3 times. Then she opened her email and started drafting her resignation from Whitmore Capital. Clear, professional, effective immediately. She didn't mention Marcus, didn't mention the party, just stated that she'd accepted a position elsewhere and would be available to discuss transition protocols at their convenience. It felt good. It felt clean. It felt like the first choice she'd made in 2 years that was entirely her own. 3 months later, the conference room at Cross Ventures had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the financial district. Elena stood at the head of the table, presenting the final numbers on the Singapore acquisition, the one the Whitmores had blocked 3 years ago, now successfully closed under her direction. Damien sat at the far end, expression unreadable as always, but when she finished, when the board members broke into spontaneous applause, he caught him smiling. Not the careful, calculated smile he used in negotiations, a real one. After the meeting, as people filtered out congratulating her, Damien approached. "The Wall Street Journal wants an interview about the deal. They specifically requested you." "Did they mention Marcus?" "Once, to note that he's no longer with Whitmore Capital." He handed him his tablet. The article was already pulled up. "Marcus Whitmore III leaves family firm amid restructuring." Translation, they'd fired him after Elena's departure had exposed exactly how much of his success had been built on her work. "The Trisha must be furious," Elena said. "Patricia is launching a counterbid on the Seattle tech company we're targeting next quarter. She's using every connection she has to block us." He didn't sound concerned. "Think you can handle it?" Elena thought about the girl who'd stood in the Waldorf ballroom 3 months ago, frozen in humiliation, waiting for someone to save her. She thought about the woman who'd closed a multi-million-dollar deal this morning using nothing but intelligence, strategy, and the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was worth. "Yes," she said, "I can handle it." Damien nodded, started to walk away, then paused. "Elena," it was the first time he'd used her first name. Yes. That night at the Waldorf, you asked why I helped you. You said you dislike waste. I lied. I helped you because I watched you stand there refusing to break, and I recognized something, the same thing I saw in myself 20 years ago when I had nothing and everyone said I would never amount to anything. What's that? The absolute refusal to let other people's limitations define your ceiling. He smiled slightly. Also, Patricia Whitmore's face when I announced you were joining Cross Ventures was worth at least $10 million in entertainment value. Elena laughed. Real laughter, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in years. Dinner, Damien asked, to celebrate the Singapore deal, somewhere Marcus and his mother are likely to see us. Purely for strategic purposes, of course. Of course, Elena agreed, purely strategic. But when he smiled at her, really smiled, not the corporate mask, but something genuine and warm, and possibly even nervous, she realized some rescues weren't about saving someone. They were about recognizing when someone was strong enough to save themselves, and simply making sure they had the tools. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Page 6 says you're dating Damien Cross. Please tell me you're not rushing into another rich man situation. She typed back, not dating, working, building something real. I'll explain at Sunday dinner. Then added, but if I were dating him, would that be so bad? Her mother's response was immediate. Mija, if that man looks at you the way he looked at you that night, like you were the most valuable thing in the room, then he can join us for Sunday dinner, but he better like pernil. Elena glanced at Damien, who was back to reading something on his tablet, completely absorbed in whatever crisis required his attention next. Hey, she said. He looked up. Do you like pernil, Puerto Rican roast pork? He blinked. Then that almost smile appeared. I don't know. I've never tried it. My mother makes it every Sunday. You should come if you're free. Are you inviting me to meet your mother, Miss Reyes? I'm inviting you to try the best Puerto Rican food in Queens, Mr. Cross. The fact that my mother will interrogate you about your intentions is just a bonus. Damien was quiet for a moment. Then, what time should I be there? 3 o'clock, and don't be late. She doesn't care how many billions you have. If you're late, you're starting off wrong. Noted. He held her gaze. Elena, yes? Thank you. For inviting me to dinner. For saying yes that night, in the car. He looked almost uncertain, which made her heart do something complicated. I gambled that you'd be brave enough to choose yourself. If you'd said no, if you'd decided to rebuild on your own without my help, I would have respected it. But I'm glad you didn't. Elena thought about how to respond, how to explain that his offer wasn't rescue, it was permission, permission to stop apologizing for her ambition, permission to stop making herself smaller, permission to walk through doors with her head up instead of her eyes down. I'm glad I said yes, too, even if you were using me to antagonize Patricia Whitmore. Oh, I'm absolutely still doing that, he grinned. But that's become something of a bonus rather than the primary objective. What's the primary objective now? Damien looked at her for a long moment. I'm still calculating that. I'll let you know when I have the final numbers. But his eyes, those storm cloud gray eyes that first seen her across a ballroom full of people who couldn't see past her background, said he already knew. He was just waiting for the right moment to make his move. And Elena, who had spent her whole life being 10 steps ahead, found she didn't mind waiting. Some investments, after all, were worth taking time to appreciate.